Greetings, friends. Today we welcome two members of the Finlay family who have served on the Manning Chapel Choir. The choir is led by university organist and chapel choir director John Scott, who is an accomplished conductor, organist, and church musician, and a composer who has been awarded, among other accolades, Theatre Nova Scotia's Robert Merritt Award for Best Sound Design and Original Score. The chapel choir through the years has been an avenue through which Acadia University became known in the community, displaying musical excellence and opportunities for the artistic expression of students. The choir leads the music in our regular chapel services and often provides special music such as the song Chaplain, in addition to sold-out concerts like the Wassail concerts and the collaborative events with musicians from the community. Among others, the special events has been a tour of England entitled Pilgrim Song in 2006. The choir has shown great resilience, adapting to the coronavirus pandemic, providing beautiful choral pieces with a virtual choir. And today, we explore the experience of the chapel choir from the perspective of two choristers. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Would you please introduce yourselves and tell us how you heard about the Manning Chapel Choir, when you started singing with the choir?
Sure. I'm Meg Finlay. I started singing with the chapel choir right at the beginning of my first year at Acadia. Part of the orientation week was to go to the chapel for a service. And it was at that time that I was formally introduced to the choir. I was very lucky to have had an aunt who knew someone who was in the chapel choir beforehand, so I knew of its existence, but that was when I was first introduced to it, and I started singing right away, and luckily John wanted to keep me in, so I've been singing with them ever since.
And I'm Cameron Finlay, I'm Meg's father, and I first found out about the choir through Meg, that she had joined this choir, and she was, dare I say, singing its praises. Coming to visit her on numerous occasions, I was often working in Halifax for business, which allowed me to come up and see Meg for a day here in Wolfville. And I would take in a service at the chapel, or on some occasions a rehearsal with the choir. And John invited me to join in on those rehearsals. So I got to know him a little bit through that. And then on other occasions, after an evening service, just getting together for fellowship afterwards with John, and my wife and I and Meg would chat with him and learn more about the music scene in Nova Scotia, and particularly around Acadia. So I got to know the choir before I even lived here. I moved here in January of 2020, and one of the very first things we did was approach John and say, can we sing in the chapel choir? And he seemed very pleased to welcome us. And yes. It's been a lovely experience.
Yes, and of course your dear wife also.
Yes, my wife is also a singer. She's an alto. Yes. Yes.
Special people in a choir. So your wife is an alto, but what do you both sing? What's your voice type, and what have been some of your favorite occasions and individual pieces of music singing with the Manning Chapel Choir?
I sing soprano, and there's been so many excellent occasions to sing with the choir. In the first 2 years that I sang with the choir, it was a more fully rounded full chorus. There were sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses, and we did a lot of really excellent music. I remember during Holy Week, we did the Allegri Miserere once, and that was really phenomenal. We had some excellent soloists from the choir, And that was really magical. The chapel was in mostly darkness, and it was truly a magical experience. I also remember John would take us around campus, and we would do Chaplain in the Harriet Irving Botanical Gardens. That was lovely. When we'd go around the valley as well, we did a Chaplain service by candlelight in Port Williams, and we did one at St. John's Anglican Church. My other favorites, of course, are the wassail shows, which are sort of a folky medieval Christmas concert. And of course, that's right up my alley as a medievalist myself. I loved performing these songs of the era that I study, which is great. And I'm very grateful to John for bringing in really talented musicians of various and interesting instruments. Really, really excellent.
And I sing bass, low bass, and I've really enjoyed singing with this group. As much as singing with a large choir is quite wonderful, with the chapel choir being a smaller choir, frequently it's one to a part, which puts a lot of work on the singer to know the music well. But it's also a wonderful feeling when you're working with the other singers. And John introduced us to a piece by Peter Nardon called A New Commandment, and it's a wonderful structured piece of music with meaningful words. And it really touched me so much so that when my mother passed away last autumn, we included it in the music for her funeral service, because it just spoke so deeply to the grace of God and the presence of God in our lives.
Yes. Do you have a preference for music at any particular time in the Christian calendar, like Lent or Christmas or?
There is so much good music written for the church that there are stellar pieces that can be performed throughout the church year. To pin down one would almost be a disservice to the other times. Now, having said that,
I was going to say, I'm going to do it.
having said that, of course, there's wonderful music for Advent and Christmas, and there's so much that's been written for that time. But I think the ones that really pull at the heartstrings are the pieces for Lent and particularly Holy Week. I think they're the ones that perhaps have the most poignant and emotional impact. They're the ones that certainly resonate with me long after you finish singing.
There's a certain level of emotion that you can put into a piece for Holy Week and even Advent, that sort of sense of expectation and yet great sadness and yet that sort of hope for the future. You can get this sort of beautiful range of emotions in just one piece, and to be able to sing that. There's a sense of catharsis, I think, in doing that, but there's also a sense of really spiritual worship even in providing that sort of music for a congregation who needs that sort of range of emotion in music. So yeah, I would say Advent and Lent would be the times when you really get that most emotional sort of sense of music.
And what's been the most challenging piece you've ever sung, given what's written for your part?
For a time, John had me singing second soprano, so I would argue almost anything was particularly difficult given John's excellent taste in music and difficulty of second soprano parts. But there was one, oh heck, I don't remember, that crazy composer who does things in crazy amounts of sharps and flats and many, many parts. Starts with an M maybe?
Not sure.
Oh, all right. Well, we can cut this.
Sorry.
It's all right. Trying to think of anything else that's really difficult.
Must have been a rough one for the bass. This is challenging.
All sorts of pieces have different challenges. Probably for me, the biggest challenge is range. I find that a lot of modern composers write for very high-pitched basses, up at the top end of my range, and so I struggle with that. But in terms of musical composition, Not that I've done it here at the chapel, but I've sung music by John Reeves, who I believe just recently passed away. He was a Toronto-based composer, and his music was particularly difficult to sing. It's the tonalities and chordal structures and chordal progressions were I found personally quite difficult to sing. But most of my issues are just I don't have much of an upper range, and so, as I say, I'm very much a second bass.
I've just actually remembered a spring concert that we did as part of the chapel choir. We performed it at the Festival Theatre, and we performed a piece by Randall Thompson, who doesn't write music the way that you would expect to see it across a page. It's much more open to interpretation. There's more shapes rather than staves and things like that. And I found that particularly difficult, not because of what John was asking us to do, but rather because I wasn't comfortable with how the music looked on the page. I found it very hard to interpret that and be an individual in a choir without a sort of readable line, to me at least. It was something I wasn't familiar with, and so that was quite a challenge, but it was a very important learning experience, I think.
Do you mean R. Murray Schafer?
That's the one I mean.
Not Randall
yeah,
Thompson.
R. Murray Schafer.
R. Murray Schafer, yes.
Not Randall Thompson. Sorry.
So the choir has kept you from being bored, I
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and given you challenge and
Yes.
given you enough stretch.
Yes.
That is not just, okay, we're singing the Hallelujah chorus for the
Yeah.
100th time, lovely as it is, but you know, you wake me up in the middle of the night, I can sing it
Yes.
perfect pitch and all of that. Have there been any other special occasions, workshops, any other trips you might not have yet mentioned that stand out for you?
With the chapel choir?
Yes.
Well, because I joined 6 weeks pre-COVID, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for that sort of thing. But last Christmas, we had the Wassail concerts for the first time in 3 years. And it was my first experience performing in that. And that really was great fun. That was a wonderful experience. And our first concert was not here at the chapel, but at a small building up on the ridge, and it was packed with people, and that was a lovely feeling of community. And then the next two performances were here, and both of those were sold out shows as well. And so it was a marvelous time of feeling the effect of music and the warmth of music, and that people thoroughly enjoyed and wanted to be there. For them, it was part of the completeness of the season. And without that, something would have been missing. And I think a lot of people have been missing that for the last 3 years. And it felt great to be able to be part of it, but also to offer that as part of the Christmas season.
Yeah. I have loved traveling and doing those sort of Christmas concerts. In terms of workshops, though, we were invited to be part of an album release in 2021, 2022? Anyway, and was it? Yes, I think so. And the musicians came in before we did the album release, and there was sort of a workshop there where, you know, this very, very small chapel choir had this experience of singing music that we were, again, unfamiliar with, a lot of gospel sort of jazz music, which is different to the sort of usual things, but still very valuable, and it was a great learning experience, and I found really encouraged me to sing out in a way that I was unfamiliar with, and that was really valuable.
And that was a fun concert.
It was a great concert.
Well, you both mentioned coronavirus. You know, how did this affect choral singing, not just in the chapel, but with other choirs that you sing in? What changes have you observed now that we have gone from virtual singing in masks, to now we're back in person as congregations and choirs?
Yeah, it was a very strange experience for me. When COVID started, I was just graduating from Acadia, and then I immediately moved to England. in the middle of the pandemic, which was sort of crazy, but I did it. And at the same time, I was still employed as a soprano section lead for a church here in Wolfville. And so I was recording the soprano part in England and then sending that to the choir director, who would then send that to the choir, and then they could sing along with that. So that was very odd. That was a sort of sense of choral singing that I don't think has ever really happened before, and was very odd because I'm very much used to trying to blend in with other voices, but I was asked to sort of be the lead in a very open, very exposed way, and that was quite odd. And it would come together as this beautiful choral piece that was, mixed very well by the director. But I found when I came back to singing in choirs in person, I was a lot more confident in my own line and in reading and in leading, because I'd had this experience of being so exposed. It was a lot easier to come back and be someone with a lot more musical confidence, I found. Which was great. Also, masks help enunciation, because you have to get those consonants through the masks. So that was a lovely part of unmasking and suddenly having beautiful consonants all the time.
Yeah. Great.
COVID has been horrible.
Yes.
If you believed the press in the first 6 months of the epidemic, choristers, choirs, were comprised of homicidal maniacs, and that our very activity was somehow purposely trying to kill people. I mean, just insane things were out there on the web. When we were finally allowed to come together as singers again outside of the virtual experience that Meg has just described, which in its own way is a very curious experience, but it's not really choral singing, because the idea of choral singing is that you blend with the people around you. When you're recording in isolation, that's impossible. It's impossible. It is impossible. So the ability to come back together as a choir and sing was a wonderful experience. But of course, doing so in a mask, it changes, as Meg mentioned, the ability to hear words, to enunciate. But even more importantly was the ability just to breathe, because the masks we were using were so-called singer's masks, which are extra layers, and trying to breathe through that to get enough breath in to support the voice, it was exhausting. Yeah. It was really, really fatiguing to try and sing in that context. Ultimately, I think now that masks are, for the most part, off, it's meant that I've got better breath control and better enunciation.
Yes.
But it was horrible. And of course, it's still a risk. We may end up back in masks at any given point in time and need to be ready for that.
But the good news is now we know how to do it.
Precisely.
We've learned lots of things. And
absolutely.
We can make it a positive experience now.
Less negative.
Yes.
I love that. So what part does music play, especially choral singing, in the nurture of your personal spirituality?
It's essential for me. I started singing in choirs when I was 6, a year before I was technically allowed to join the children's choir, but the choir director was my brother's godfather and also a very close friend of my dad, so he'd known me growing up. But even before that, when I was born, my parents were still in the choir, and they had special robes that they could hold the baby in front of them, still sing and have the baby there. So I've been in choirs since I was born. So it's an integral part of my life, and it is for me how I most express my faith. It's really the way that I connect with God. I find spoken prayer a little more difficult, because to me there's less emotion in it, which is very odd because I study words. That's what I do. But there's something about a sung prayer that feels to me like it connects more with God and with my faith. And I'm sure that that's because I've been in choirs for forever. And so for me, being in a choir and having music as part of a worship service is so important. Yeah. During COVID, I was at various churches that didn't have any music at all because, musicians were sort of hunkering down. And it has been very odd to go to a service with no music in it. And it didn't really feel complete to me until musicians came back.
I would say that the singing of sacred music is the very essence of my spirituality. I was not a fan of Sunday school. And my mother refused to have me sitting beside her in the church pew because I was a bit of a menace, I guess. So she put me in the church choir at the age of 7, where I learned my religion at the keyboard. Beside the choir master, the organist, from learning pieces of music, we would talk about what the words meant, where they came from. I learned scripture that way, such that after the fact, when I would hear someone reading that piece of scripture, I could only hear the music.
The music comes to mind, yeah.
The words and music were just so integrally connected that I couldn't separate them. And that's still very much the way I hear words now is often with the music part of it. And I've now taken that and sort of flipped that on its head. And when I hear scripture that perhaps I don't know or are less familiar with, I'm starting to hear music in my own head, so I'm composing and putting words to music now. And it's a wonderful experience, and I feel that we're told that we are all blessed with talents. Not all talents, some bring different talents to different things. And it's important to identify what those are and use them to the glory of God and God's creation. And I firmly believe that. And I feel that music, in particular singing, has been the talent that has been given to me. And therefore I fully intend to use it for as long as I can.
Great. There was a time I sang in a choir, and I don't know if this happened to you, but I used to find that sometimes I would wake up in the morning, especially when you're working on a set of pieces for like Advent and Christmas or Lent and Easter, but I would find I would wake up and the first thing in my mind was that the music would just bubble up. Did you have any experience like that?
All the time.
Yes.
Yeah, but
all the time, especially something that's new and perhaps a little bit more difficult, or a larger work that's where you're working on it for multiple weeks in advance of offering it in a service of worship. It just becomes so ingrained, and I think the brain works on it. When you sleep, the brain sorts things out, and I think that's a time when you actually start to learn some music without trying. And maybe that's the best way to learn music, when the brain's working on it on its own.
Although there are other times for me as well where I'll wake up with some piece of music in my mind and we're not working on it, and I wonder why that's in my head when I wake up, and I wonder if it's sort of connected to the way that my thoughts have been going, or what I'm currently experiencing, if that piece of music can be solace or its own sort of prayer, if that's what's going on. Especially if it's a sacred piece that is unrelated to anything that you're currently working on.
Yeah, I found it comforting and
absolutely
very nice.
Yes.
That, first thing in the morning, it's like music just bubbles up from your mind to greet you. It's like the sun greeting you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm glad to know that. I'm not.
Of course, some of those pieces are earworms as well.
Yes.
And you can't get them out of your head.
Yeah.
And then they become a bit of a chore. But yes, it is a lovely thing to wake up with a song in your heart and in your head.
Yes. Okay, so this is where we pause to say, no, this is the advertisement for joining the chapel choir. there are lots of surprises and things that happen to you spiritually as you work with music in a group. So Meg, I wanted to ask you some more about your broader experience at Acadia. What your academic work was, what the experience has been like. What else did you do apart from choir, and more choir? And what are some of the things that you found valuable about your experience at Acadia, academic and otherwise, that you were able to take into life and work afterwards?
Yeah. At Acadia, I studied English literature. So I was not a music student, which confused most of my friends, because most of my friends were music students. But I did English literature, and the program at Acadia is quite broad in a really wonderful way. I made it as much of a medieval literature degree as I possibly could, which was delightful, and I really found my academic love in medieval literature here at Acadia. And I've taken that with me. I've completed a master's, and I'm just off to do a PhD now in medieval literature. So it's really become a passion, but I mean, Acadia was so wonderful at fueling that. The English department was also really wonderful. I was involved in the executive committee of the English department for quite some time, planning events and planning fundraisers and things like that. And I find, of course, being in a choir, you sort of learn teamwork and leadership, but leadership in a way that's helpful to all. And that's a super valuable skill that you can use anywhere, which is wonderful. Acadia is a really tight community. Academically, I found there was no real strife between departments in the art building. It was really lovely. I was able to take courses in different departments, which really gives me a broad sense of a lot of different things, which was super valuable. And the chapel choir as well, I mean, is full of students from different departments, lots and lots of science students, music students, of course, and me, an English student, and we had other art students as well. And so that real community of academia was really fostered by both Acadia and the chapel choir in a really wonderful way. So when I left Acadia, I went to England almost immediately to do a master's degree. And when I got there, when you do a medieval master's degree, you meet all sorts of people who do all sorts of strange things with medieval things. I met people who were really interested in medieval science, people who were really interested in the history of one particular decade, people who were interested in trade routes through the Mediterranean, people who were interested in religious orders and just the way life was, as well as people like me who are interested in the literature of the era. And so you sort of, again, get this broad academic community. Yes, of course, we're all specified in one 1,000-year period, but you get this sort of broad sense of people with different interests all coming together in a way very much like Acadia and the chapel choir. We all come together for one purpose. And of course, we all weren't working towards one project together. We all had our own individual projects, but there was sort of a wonderful sense of community when we all went to a coffee shop together and worked on things together and bounced ideas off of each other in a real collaborative way that, for me at least, was fostered here. Yeah.
Great. Any favorite writer or writers from the medieval period?
My love of the medieval period began with Geoffrey Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales, of course, but my focus for my master's and a little bit in my PhD is Thomas Malory, who wrote the last medieval Arthurian legend, Le Mort d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur. A really long, brilliant text, I think, from Arthur's birth to his death. There's a lot of really great imagery, lots of visceral imagery. It feels very real and quite modern in some sense. It reminds me much of books we read today, in sort of sense of the everyday.
Great. So what I'm hearing is that Acadia also helped you to explore your passions, which is nice.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was really fostered in that. Yeah, really just given a sense of go find out what you'd love, and if we can help, let us help. But yeah, it was phenomenal. I loved being at Acadia.
Great. So we've been through strange things like COVID. It's almost like, BC now is before COVID.
Yes.
And lots of conversations about artificial intelligence and climate change and what's the future going to bring. So I'd ask you both to share with us your vision, dreams, hopes for the Manning Chapel Choir and the place of music in the Manning Memorial Chapel ministry.
Yeah, I sincerely hope that the chapel choir continues in musical excellence as it has and as it has been while I've been here. Certainly, it's a wonderful, wonderful experience and community to join, and I hope that lots of people are able to see that, if not join it. I hope that the place of music in the chapel remains. And I hope that lots of people come and hear the music in the midst of a service as a response to word, as a what do I call it? I can think of all sorts of French words for that, but as sort of an enhancement of the word that's spoken in a service, and as a real. The chapel choir for me is a real representation of Acadia community and excellence. As I say, it's a place for people of different degrees and departments and persuasions in life, people where students can meet community members and really engage in a really diverse community that's really very much worth it. And the chapel is such a lovely, inclusive place for it to exist. So I hope that it continues in that sort of sense.
Choirs for me, and I've been in choirs since I was a child, choirs for me have always been a form of family. And the Manning Chapel Choir is most certainly that. Yes. There's a lovely feeling of community where people are welcome, where everyone's role is important, everyone's contribution is important.
And everyone is important.
And everyone is important, indeed. And I think that is allowed to flourish largely in part because of what John Scott is doing with the choir. John is a very pastoral person, as well as a wonderful instructor in both music and in scripture. So he doesn't foist or force belief on the singers, but he explains what we're singing and why we're singing it and how that might engage the listener and why that's so important. And so he's very quick to say, whether this is your belief or not, there is someone for whom it is integral to their belief. And that is why singing this music with these words is so critically important. And he's very good at getting that across without being any sort of bully or sort of a top-down leadership. He's very collaborative. He also has a remarkable knowledge of church music, hugely expansive, of all types, all genres. And I think certainly under John's guidance, the chapel choir has a great future because he can adapt so quickly to so many different challenges. And I think one of the most wonderful things we started doing last year were the services billed as words and music, where someone from the community would come and offer their own compositions, either spoken word or music, or sometimes both, in the context of an evening service. And I think this is an important step, and one of probably many, to have services at the chapel evolve, to engage, to be more open to everyone, rather than trying to just either carry on how things always have been, or to just espouse one type of service and not look beyond that. I think that the chapel has the ability and the potential to be many things to many people without sacrificing integrity. Yes. Maintaining the integrity, maintaining the reason for gathering, the glorification of God, the saying thank you, the bringing our aches and pains, our wishes, our hopes, our aspirations together as a community to proclaim God's name. And I think under John's guidance, the choir can be an integral part of that.
Thank you, and thanks to you, the choristers, and to John. I have to tell you, sometimes I'm there to preach, and after the music, I just want to sit. Lost in wonder, love, and praise, or
yes.
something. So I think that it's an integral part, but also different parts of a service speak to people at different times. So sometimes it's just the music. And I can testify that the music has spoken to me so beautifully. So many times I say, oh, okay, I really need to get up and look lively and preach or say a prayer. But it has been really, really wonderful to meet both of you and to experience the excellent music of the choir. And as you said, looking forward to other innovations. The service of words and music has been really nice. We talk glibly about town and gown, but church is not just supposed to be a holy huddle for the in-group, but we are supposed to have a kind of, at least try to think of the whole human family and of nature, everyone and everything that God created, and music is everywhere. You know, sound is everywhere. So thank you both, and Mary Ellen and the other members of the choir, and John, for really lifting us, comforting us, inspiring us. And one of the good things about COVID too is that more of the music is actually online.
Yes.
So we can go back and enjoy those pieces again. Thank you so much, and keep making music.